since we're here, it'll actually be my pleasure to introduce Jahan. In the world of sort of psychedelic inquiry and people who are experts and someone to really go to as an authority on this. I went to a dear friend of mine who I consider the authority on this, and I said, I have a better authority yet. And she recommended Jahan. We went back and forth a little bit. We really worked hard to kind of schedule this one. And I asked around a little bit, and literally friends who had seen him speak before just were like, I can't believe it, like you got Jahan to speak. This is amazing. Dug a little bit into his own background, and I realized, wow, he's not just representing the best of sort of academic and sort of formal institutional learning on this stuff. With California, you go to California Institute of Integral Studies, which is probably one of the top places to be learning this stuff. But he also has, grounding in the more traditional indigenous traditions, and really kind of seems to bring both worlds. I have so much to learn here. I couldn't be more humbled and grateful to have Jahan here. And so I hope you'll join me in unmuting just for a second and giving him a huge freaking round of applause. Thank you so much for being here, Jahan.
Woo! Cool. Well, thank you guys for coming. I love that you guys are interested in this topic. It's honestly my favorite topic in the world. I'm 36 years old and I have not come across something that has interested me more. And just to give a little background about myself, I just had my dissertation defense about a month ago. The dissertation was over 300 pages, focused on psilocybin. I got my master's also in Consciousness Transformative Studies, and my bachelor's was in physics, philosophy, and psychology. My route began when I had an immense psychedelic experience at the age of 18 that really transformed my life from the inside out. I was an atheist, suicidal, depressed, materialistic, focused on science. And it just happened to be one in just a 4-hour journey that really turned my life upside down and made me focus on learning, love, and studying. And part of my training for the dissertation, I decided to go deeper, and I found a community that was training guides for over 30 years. So I went through a 2-year training within the Mazatec mushroom tradition. They've been holding this knowledge of mushroom use going back a few thousand years to the Mayans. As part of that process, I also went the 2-year therapy training with Hakomi, a somatic psychotherapy training. I assisted for 2 years in the Psychedelic Certificate training at CIIS. I'm now mentoring the Emerging School of Consciousness Studies to help consciousness medicine, help cultivate guides that want to step into this work. And I facilitate legal psilocybin sessions in Jamaica. So it's pretty much become full encompassing of my life. And the dissertation I hope to publish and send to publishers in the next month or so. Awesome here and sharing this work with you guys. So as I understand it, you guys like to have like an interactive component, and it's not something, especially with Zoom and with psychedelics, preferably I'd be giving you guys some kind of sacrament and we'd be going through something together. But for this session, to do something a little bit more interactive, I thought maybe just a brief meditation. So if you want to just go with this, just close your eyes. Ground your body. And I wanted to share the stuff I felt like to have that first really big psychedelic breakthrough that I would say still has become the most important experience in my life. So feel your chest, your quads, your legs, your shoulders. Breathe deeply. Feel the sensitivity of your skin. And from this place, imagine that a voice, own, but something very familiar arises in your consciousness and begins to speak with you. Immediately, the shock of this first taking place, you're like, is this real? And the voice replies, yes. And the voice feels like it's something you've known your entire life. There's a big familiarity and trust. And just the presence of this voice in your consciousness brings tears. There's a knowing, there's a type of homecoming. And it feels that this voice is God. And imagine perhaps you've been an atheist and this is beyond rationality, that this couldn't possibly exist, but something opens inside and knows this is absolute truth. It's the most true thing you've ever known. And just by its existence and knowing it's there shatters your soul. And you begin to feel in your skin something that subtly had been there perhaps your entire life, that you feel you're eternal, that there's a quality you've been carrying inside you that's always been there and will always be there, you know, before the Big Bang until after death, something indestructible. And just knowing that you have always existed and will always exist takes away all the fear that you've ever had. It just melts. And instead, by feeling this, there's actually like a sweetness, a type of bliss. And it's not only felt within your consciousness, but in your skin, as if every cell is rejoicing and celebrating in this knowledge and awareness. That this is the most content feeling you have ever felt. And then the voice asks, what do you want? And you may be a little stunned here. What do I want? I've never thought this was possible. In this ultimate state of contentness, how could I possibly want something? But you're so curious and don't want to answer. So you do come up with something and you ask, what are we? What are we as human beings? And then you see this vision of light rise out of the ground and fill every human being around you. And you realize that we are light. That light is intelligence, it is love, and all those qualities are exactly the same thing. The earth is actually a kind of heaven type of experience, that we're here in this almost space-time ships in these vessels in our body to play around. And that this whole worldview, this paradigm is so different than you thought the world was, with all the pain, everything in it. And you see your life flash before your eyes. And you see it was almost scripted, that every painful moment was actually necessary to have you and take you to this breakthrough. So the next thing the voice says, that the most important thing in existence is love. That it is the most foundational truth for all of life. And then miles behind that is learning. And everything else is so insignificant compared to those qualities that you will never have to worry about anything else again, as long as you keep this compass, these two qualities, and in that order. And from this place, you see the interconnection of everything between your thoughts and the environment. That the same space in you is the same space as everyone, that this being that grows in your awareness, you realize it's behind, seeing through your life the entire time, that it's a witness behind your eyes, a listener behind your ears, who is in everywhere, within everything, orchestrating a story through our lives. And so if you go ahead, open your eyes. And so that was the most intimate of experience like I had ever had in every way possible, like at the soul of my being, deeply transformative. I thought about it every day for the next 7 years, that this could happen. And then at the same time, how could this happen and it not be known to the rest of the world, right? How could something so huge be kept under wraps? And I certainly started doing research online and seeing that people throughout time have been having these experiences. I mean, I was looking into mushrooms, but within psychedelics in general, like, how are we not screaming at the rooftops to have something so foundational that your being just thought was so real and so loving and so true? I mean, the impact gave me a sense of reservoir and force to go through almost 20 years of academia. It's become, definitely the pool of power I've used for my life moving forward. And then also growing up in a world where they weren't accepted, but you also not knowing why, based on no scientific study, based on no evidence, based on nothing but ignorance and fear. So I ended up going to school, trying to study neuroscience for a while, and seeing that that wasn't going to get it. And I tried to study physics for 3.5 years and math. I was like, this isn't getting into consciousness, and kept trying to get this pull forward, and took some more mushrooms, like studied mysticism. So I did graduate, with philosophy, then came to the debate and focus on consciousness 10 years ago. And that leads me where I am now. And there was just a major homecoming about 4 years ago when I was like, this has been the most transformative experiences in your life. Psychedelics have. More than all my relationships, even though like I hold them really, really high, more than any books I've read, which I've given so much myself to, more than any teacher I've gone and see, it had been the psychedelic experiences that I've undergone, this deep sense of deep, intimate communion with the cosmos that really created a structure for my life. And I felt it was the best way that I could be of service in this world. So that's led me to write the dissertation. I'll go through some of the stories of the research. And it's really exciting to see that in a very large way, our world is waking up to this. And for us, it's new, but in the history, the use of them goes back thousands and maybe even millions of years. We'll get to that very, very soon. That these plant psychedelics have been on the planet far beyond, before our species, and they're found in almost every ecosystem. Again, there's this question, were they left out of our society? And we certainly have our biases, whether they be from religion, law, sense of safety. We're generally just scared of what we do not know. And I can't think of anything more paradigm shattering, but also effective when it comes to healing, when it comes to psychedelics. So what the research has found, there's been about years of focused research right now on psilocybin, and there was also 10 years of research between the 60s to the 70s, is on average 67% of participants meet the criteria of what's known as the mystical experience. That's a very, very high amount. Experiences that either are normally spontaneous or developed after years of meditation, that give them the right prep sessions, the right integration, the right settings, the right facilitators, and everything. You can almost scientifically count that you may have a mystical experience in such a way that after a 20-year follow-up, the ones from the 60s and 70s, that 80% of the participants still call it one of the top 5 most important experiences of their lives, right? This outdips any kind of commodity, anything we can buy, any kind of vacation, any kind of therapeutic setting. You're talking about something that burns and stays in your soul and your mind, that you constantly think about and shapes who you are for the next 50 years of your life, right? So something so powerful kept out of our public awareness. So again, what's some more of what the science has shown? The personality trait that's developed the most in these psilocybin experiences is the one we have found that's known as openness. Right, the personality, you can contrast it to rigidity or closeness, where the person needs to take control of everything. The open personality correlates with creativity and openness to new ideas, to the environment, to the people around it, right? You can very much say it's an evolutionary adaptive skill, it's a sense of being self-adaptive to things that change around us. Beings that are more adapt better, while beings that are closed kind of stop learning in many, many different ways, right? So that's a personality change that stays with. And personality development is known to start to move slower once we move into their 20s, but this one generally opens. We see an 80% success rate when it comes to addiction. We know with alcohol and then nicotine. An 80% success rate of breaking patterns that perhaps have been there for most of the people that were with the nicotine studies were addicted for 20 years and couldn't stop, right? This is dramatically impacting their lives and moving them towards a sense of their fatality. And they're able to break out of these abusive patterns that they were not able to let go of. A lot of the psilocybin studies have been focused on what's called near end-of-life anxiety. These are normally cancer patients, terminally ill, that have under 2 years left to live. Some of them 6 months, and understandably, they're frozen in paralysis. Right? Like their death is around the corner, how they come, and it's stored in your body. Like, how can they possibly show up for the friends and families around them to finish whatever life purpose they have left, to spend the quality time their children or spouse. And so not only are they suffering, everybody around them is suffering, you know, knowing that their doom is impendable. Just one psilocybin experience allows them to come back and re-enjoy their lives. So there's a very strange quality with psilocybin where this near end of life experience or death rebirth experience is very pronounced, specifically in this compound, but throughout many psychedelics. It's a very known archetype where a person goes through what they experience as a death. So that's what happened to me when I had this breakthrough moment. I thought I was dying. And I had to come to peace with it. When I did, it was a profound explosion opening. And they're able to move into this space. And what they all come back and say is they realize that love is the most important thing, that there's nothing to be scared of, that you are being held. There's some kind of intelligence at the end, like that you are okay. And they come back with a whole new will to be alive. You know, you can think of just the implications it can have for society, that people would be, for example, on the edge of suicide. I mean, I was suicidal as a teen because I'd gone through a very painful childhood. And I could say this didn't necessarily wash it away. It had me breakthroughs and change my worldview, but it was my sense of resource and knowing moving forward that I would never follow through with it. You know, and again, that's been almost 20 years that it's moved on. Another well-known, what's categorized as a psychedelic is MDMA. That's projected to be legal by 2021. And the focus of MDMA has been PTSD. It's a different class of chemicals than psilocybin. It's a main, while psilocybin's and MDMA reliably produces the same kind of experience, which is a sense of wholeness, love, security, well-being, trust. So when people have PTSD, they're so locked in fear that they can't process the material, right? And it's frozen in their body and their consciousness, like it's sort of looping. MDMA creates a sense of safety, you know, of whoever they're with, so they can talk about the material and digest this, process it, and move on. So 3 MDMA sessions, people that have had PTSD for over 20 years no longer meet the criteria for PTSD. So thanks, there's been a focus to the veterans in this population, in this area, that all sides of the political parties are on board to get this on track and move forward. They're on phase 3 FDA trials. And so it looks like 2021 MDMA will be legal, medically legal. And then it looks for psilocybin, thanks to Compass. It's a for-profit company that was able to streamline the process because they already came in with all the funding. Psilocybin will likely be medically legal for depression come 2022. So we are in a world of change, very much the near future. I mean, I've been looking at psychotherapy now for a decade, and I can say there's no other treatments or methodologies that are close to being as effective for depression, for PTSD, for addiction, for things that really hurt many of us in the world. And we've been focusing on problems, things that need to be healed, but they do a lot for people that are also already healthy. You know, and I've seen that it's a sense of evolution that never ends, especially with psilocybin. I see there's a constant stream of knowledge and awareness and growth that seems infinite that takes place. And so also get into the neuroscience because it's almost just as equally as fascinating. So it's only since 2016 we started putting people on MRIs with psilocybin and LSD. What happens is it creates a hyper-connected brain state, what's known as the default mode network in the brain, known as the ego network in the brain. When you think of me, it's the default mode network that comes in. That default mode network dissolves and allows the whole brain to hyper-communicate and begin to speak to each other, right? And so whole new levels of creativity and connection during these 3 or 4 hours. I believe this also would translate to the unitive states of oneness people experience their consciousness, because your brain states closely resemble a sense of wholeness and oneness in the biology. And that would translate to a sense of wholeness and all the creative insights that happen within our consciousness. It also stimulates what's known as neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. Before the 1990s, scientists did not think this was possible. So when you eat psilocybin, your brain actually physically begins to grow. New neurons arise. What's known as spinogenesis, The re-enlivening of dendrites also happens and takes place, right? So you have the main part of the neuron, you have the dendrites, the arms, you know, and then you have the synapses that take place. And so depression can be seen in physiological sense as the atrophying of dendrites, that parts of the brain are no longer communicating. So there's a sense of isolation, which is, I believe, very much correlated with the sense of isolation people experience in depression. So those dendrites that have atrophied, again, come to life, re-enlivening those connections within the brain. Right? So if you put this all together, you have a hyper-connected brain states, the growth of new neurons, and the healing of parts of the brain that atrophied, and many of these connections actually stabilize and structurally become a part of their brain moving forward, right? So very, very amazing when it comes to the neuroscience around this. And this happens with virtually no biotoxicity. Right. So again, this is an incredible compound. It doesn't mess with any other parts of your body. The theoretical dose to die from psilocybin is like 1,000 doses. I mean, you pretty much can't reach it. The tryptamines, including LSD and DMT, are pretty much physiologically completely safe. And they lock into what's known as the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor, our own receptors in our brain that serotonin works with, 4 times better than serotonin itself. Well, again, leads to a question, how is it possible that this exogenous compound, a compound found in the environment, actually creates more complex brain states and blocks into the receptors perfectly better than the compounds within our own brain? So that leads me really to this big understanding, this question I've been thinking about since 15. How do psychedelics exist? How does some kind of chemical compound, create the experience of not only complex states of consciousness, but even perhaps seeing visions, really complex visions that sometimes I'd say are better than the best CGI I've seen in the world come into existence? It doesn't seem like it's chaotic in any way, but think about higher order. And I think the only way to really see this is to contextualize it within the context of evolution. Right? These plants and these fungi have been growing in the environment around us and with us our entire evolutionary history. And so that leads us to the understanding of, well, what is mycelium, right? So the mushroom we know, like the cap and stem formation, is actually the fruit of a much larger body known as mycelium, right? It's almost like saying the apple to the tree. The apple is the fruit of the very complex large organism of the tree. Well, the fungus, the mushroom, is the fruit of mycelium. And mycelium is an underground that interconnects all the plants in the environment. Some of these mycelial structures are thousands of miles long. They are the largest organisms in the environment, connecting all the root systems in the way that actually pass information between all the plants around it, sending chemical information along with nutrients from plant to plant. 90% of plants on the planet have a symbiotic relationship to mycelium. 80% of plants on the planet would die if mycelium stops existing, right? It's pretty much the net of the biosphere of life on our planet. And it's from such a complex living web that we have these mushroom structures that arise. So if we're moving to the deep history, you know, I was also curious, well, why would a mushroom do this? Why would a mushroom create this compound that creates these complex states? The Professor Richard Doyle, who wrote this book, Darwin's Pharmacy, read over 1,000 reports for his research. And he deduced that the main psychedelic insights is that the participant becomes aware that they are part of the vast interconnected living network. Right? That we are wholes within larger wholes within a larger system. He calls this the ecodelic insight. So part of all the vast, psychedelic studies, that's actually the larger context that we are interconnected living beings within other larger beings. Well, why would this grow in the environment? What advantage would it have for an organism like mycelium to bring that compound into the environment? Well, probably to create a state of homeostasis in the environment, a state of harmony, right? If it's feeding, so mycelium, for example, it's been said, if it keeps the host environment healthy, it can potentially live forever. Mycelium can live millions of years as long as the environment is healthy. So it has a lot of intentions and desires to keep all the organisms within it fairly healthy. So if it's going to create complex and intelligent beings in the environment, it would like it to be aware that it's actually part of a larger, vast, interconnected web. You know, it does a lot for it in terms of being a symbiotic relationship. To say all life really generally evolves through symbiosis, through the interactions between one organism and another. You know, for example, the canine teeth, you know, with a lot of creatures, just for ripping, the way they take in food sources. Our entire digestive tracts, you know, have to do with the symbiotic energy of the plants and animals we eat, as well as our lungs coming from the oxygen from the tree. Our very evolution has always happened through symbiosis, mutual interdependence of organisms in the environment. So when large contexts see this, how this happens is what's known as Gaia theory. Gaia theory is put there in the 70s by the chemist named James Lovelock. And the idea is that the Earth is always trying to regulate itself through a sense of homeostasis with the molecules in the environment and the plants on the Earth, right? It's always trying to create a state of homeostasis, the way your body's always trying to create a homeostasis, that this is happening on a larger level. In the way that these can be seen as Gaian molecules, that are molecules that grow around the planet so we can live in harmony with the environment. There are over 200 different species of psilocybin mushrooms found on the planet. They're on every continent and on Antarctica. They grow freely and easily. There are over 200,000 different plants that contain DMT, right? So these are filled throughout our entire ecosystem. Now, given this kind of more theoretical context around the ecological, you know, explanation of this, I want to move us into the deep, deep, deep past of how this fungi interacts with our nervous systems. About 500 million years ago, the entire animal kingdom evolved from a strata fungi. You know, as many of us know and looked at evolution, like we all share the same like primal cell that evolved into the entire animal kingdom, you know, and evolved into the plant kingdom, also cellular life. Like life goes back into a unitary, you know, primary source. About 500 million years ago, the animal kingdom split from fungi, right? So there's a deep relationship that has always been there. While complex life evolved in waters, fungi was the largest, other than bacterial, that was the first to come onto land. It breaks down microbial life, moving onto the earth from the waters, and creates the soil for plant life to come out of the water and evolve into land. Before plants came onto land, its fossil records show there's about 20-foot tall mushroom structures covering the entire planet, right? So then plant life evolves onto land, creating a symbiotic relationship with the mycelium. The insects follow the plants, waters, and then the animals, the amphibians and the reptiles, our ancestors, come onto the land and follow the insects, right? And together we have terraformed the planet to the way we see it now, full of wildlife and plants and trees. 250 million years ago, dinosaurs ruled the planet, and our ancestors were rodent-like creatures, largely living underground to you know, escape the larger predators, the dinosaurs on the land. 65 million years ago, we have the KT impact, the large objects coming from the sky, and destroying 90% of the large life planets, the dinosaurs, and lots of trees. Well, right? It creates, and the dust went up to the sky, took away a lot of the sunlight. And for those of us that have grown mushrooms, this is the perfect kind of environment for mycelium to flourish. You have a large sense of darkness with a lot of biological life that needs to be decomposed. So then breaks down, the mycelial structure breaks down all the organisms that had been dying and creates a richer chemical soil that existed before. And out of the soil evolve even more complex forms of plant life and trees with richer chemical nutrients, like more different kinds of fruit. About 55 million years ago, our primate ancestors took up to the trees, right? From rodent-like creatures, went up to the trees and lived in the canopies for 55 million years. We developed our eyesight, you know, lost our sense of smell. more like the hand limbs formation. And we pretty much lived in a state of Garden Eden up in the canopies. Eating, having sex, so there's not too many predators for us while we lived in the canopies. About 5 million years ago, weather patterns in Africa where we evolved began to change, right? It got drier, the rainforest receded, and this forced our ancestors down to the ground. Well, what's the most common form of mushroom in the African savannas? Well, as the mycologist Paul Stamets point out, it's of a psilocybin variety, right? 22 different species of ape are known to eat mushrooms, and some even come down from the canopies to get mushroom. So as our ancestors are looking through the environment for new sources of food, they were in constant contact with psilocybin mushrooms. You know, these are things that pretty much sprout overnight and look like large flying saucers. And our ancestors' pretty much survival depend on their sight, smell, taste, and touch of what's happening in the environment. You know, even those that believe that very skeptical that primates would not have seen the mushrooms right away, even though as we walk down the streets, we pretty much see the mushrooms growing all over the ground. For a long time, we began to follow cattle, you know, herds and cattle, you know, for milk and meat. And as mushrooms are microphilic, they're dung loving. They grow naturally on the dung of cattle. So it would have been constantly in front of us as we're tracking the cattle, right? So they would have been regularly a part of their lives. So this relationship between our ancestors and psilocybin, at this deeper, more, you know, from a primate type of level, largely went through 3 different stages, you know, and they're not very distinct stages. Sometimes they're interbled, but through 3 stages having to do with dosage. At lower doses, mushrooms increase, as empirical science is found in the 70s, increase what's known as acuity, increase in edge detection. You're able to see objects more clearly, you know, in microdose amount. Things look, you can just, so would have been very helpful finding, say, a snake in the grass, you know, an animal, a predator behind the bushes, or looking for new sources of food. It will give them an evolutionary edge. With slightly higher amounts, you're talking about maybe 2 mushrooms. As a primate eats it, as soon as they find it, you have about sexual restlessness. And evidence is also found psilocybin increases, right? So now you have group bonding, a tighter sense of group bonding with your tribe, your primate group. They're feeling more closely together, identified within each other, but also a greater sense of copulation, sexual arousal. So now you compare primate group that perhaps you had psilocybin to the other primate groups in the environments. You have a primate group with an evolutionary edge that has this sense of restlessness where it has to keep moving, expanding its territory, copulating at more regular intervals, so that means it's growing in size, and a more tightly integrated network. You know, I'd go far to say something that gives us our edge as a species is our ability to band and coordinate in groups. That's really separated us from, say, reptiles that pretty much live in isolation. At greater doses, and you're talking about 4 or 5 mushrooms, you know, all the way to 12, 26, you know, the heroic dose right now, the standard is dried grams. There's almost a guarantee, I mean, a high likelihood, but not for everybody at all moments, of a mystical experience where the attention moves away from the senses into a sense of visual voyage, where we see archetypal content, you know, that are very mythological in nature. Voices arise in our consciousness. You know, but there's been somebody did their dissertation, about 40% of people that take psilocybin experience a sense of a voice other than their own, and other deities arising in their consciousness, right? So you have this kind of spirit realm kind of come into place. You have personal insights. People, my clients have seen the entire process of evolution over an hour go through their entire consciousness. You have this experience of becoming animals, of actually merging a state of unity with one in the environment and everything around you. This gives a very much a dietary, ecological explanation for the emergence of religion, right? Something that actually started by something that we're eating in the environment. As archaeologists have pointed out, the oldest form of religion is shamanism, which is generally plant-based. So this likely went on for, there was about 5 million years when we came down to the ground, all the way to the sense of agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago. And so slowly our brain size began to increase as we kept eating it smaller amounts, and then more and more and more. You have, again, structural brain formation that actually changes in our genes, and we move through generations of doing this. The cognitive archaeologist David Lewis Williams, throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, went around and saw all the cave paintings around the world, internationally renowned, won several awards within this country and other countries. And he put forward that the emergence of art, starting about 70, 80,000 years ago, was likely catalyzed by altered states of consciousness. Yes, and say the one name that has come up from this is the Stone Ape theory. So this theory is first put forward by Terrence and Dennis McKenna, awesome brothers. I'll talk about them more in a little bit. And that's been one of the more colloquial names that we've gotten with it. So David Lewis Williams deduced that the cave paintings actually arose from altered states of consciousness. When you think about it, once you start taking higher doses, you need a sense of safety, because that makes us very vulnerable. The only argument around this theory that I had found through several years is that this would have made our species more vulnerable to be tripping pretty much out in the environment. I definitely want to say, for 8 hours a day, we're generally sleeping, which makes us vulnerable while we're sitting there unconscious. All life rests and sleeps. So that takes away some of it. But the other one is we could have went and found safe environments, like the whole idea of setting, that there is a shaman, that eventually did emerge, the first kind of profession, that there is a guide, that we're looking for caves that have one entrance. Then you go in there, create a ceremony with drumming, fire, sense of ritual. So again, somebody can take care, facilitate the person, like the entrance of the cave, to make sure everybody's safe. And the other one, the cave provides darkness, especially even during the daytime. So now you're in a dark room where you're having these visionary experiences that vary our life and being projected onto the environment. Then all you really need is actually to trace with paint what you're seeing projected on the environment directly onto the wall. Here you're seeing a very simple explanation formation of arts, right? Of how we got it. We pretty much could have traced we are visually seeing onto the wall. This is very important because, as Yuval Noah Harari points out in Sapiens, about 60 years ago, we have what's called the cognitive revolution, where evolution are dictated by our biology, but by our cognition. And as Graham Hancock points out, we can find the link of what created art. We'll find out the link of what caused us to create tools, because they all started happening at the same time. So my theory is that we begin to use higher and higher doses at this time, visionary ceremonial doses that, that indigenous tribes still use today, that moves us into further and deeper levels of imagination, that created a more hyper-connected brain states that allowed us to see connecting environments and gave us the creation of tools. And that this hardware slowly was really built into our brain, so we are able to have spiritual experiences and these cognitive abilities, including language and mathematics, without these substances. Again, that this would have given us the impetus or the hardware now to create a culture as we move forward. So how did all this fall away? How did something so beautiful that would have given us a true relationship with nature, that evolved us, our biology and our consciousness, expanded our consciousness through conscious expanding substances in the environment? How did we lose touch with this? Well, I posit it was the agricultural revolution. About 10,000 years ago, we found this link that plants turn into trees, that seeds turn into plants and trees. Game changer. Now we're able to settle down in specific places and grow our own food. This allows a huge increase in population, as a positive side. And with that, you have developments in culture and society, civilizations, empires, structured religions evolve. The world as we know it functions because we learned how to grow our own food. A shadow of this, as we no longer begin to look for sources of food of that we couldn't grow. Right? We became very insulated. We stopped really going to the forest. We began to focus on the social life within the societies that we'd been building. Before that, we're hunters and gatherers and over moving. Now we're focused on the social life and only eating what we're growing, right? Well, mushrooms, as Harari pointed out, are elusive. They're spores. Like, you can't farm them the same way you can other food. In fact, the first time we learned how to grow psilocybin mushrooms was during the the 1970s. Terrence and Dennis McKenna published the first psilocybin mushrooms growers guide. And by the early 1980s, over 100,000 copies had been sold in, right? So that we're saying it's only within 40 years we've learned to grow psilocybin mushrooms. So just to quickly move through a lot of the history, so this lost to Western cultures. You know, I'm talking about, well, Asia, Africa, Europe, that had really gone through these large periods of the agricultural revolutions and really been influenced by each other's traditions. 20,000 years ago, there was a large migration, though, from Asia into the Americas, with tribes settling all around the way of North, Central, and South Americas. One of these was the Mayans. Going back about 3,000 years, they've left about 180 different relics of mushroom stones. So we have inferences of mushroom use. 500 years ago, when the Europeans came, the clergy wrote that people had been using mushrooms everywhere in ceremonies, and it was so large that at the coronation of Montezuma II, the largest leader of the largest empire in the Americas of the time, during his coronation, people were eating mushrooms. This is kind of akin to saying at the coronation of the US president, everybody's eating mushrooms, right? Well, the clergy, you can imagine, especially from Spain, didn't like this, and they asked for the eradication of this. And what happened was the greatest ethnocide in human history. 90% of the people living in North and South America had died, you know, either intentionally or through diseases. And they were asked for the eradication of the temples and all the writings. So a lot of this was lost to us. But a tribe did survive, that of the Mazatecs, that sees themselves as descendants of the Mayans, that live up in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico. I believe they survived for 3 reasons. There's remote areas over there. There are matriarchal tradition where women led the ceremonies, and the people that came over from a patriarchal tradition and believed it was only males that would hold positions of spiritual power, so they went under the radar. And the third is that they actually did convert to Catholicism, right? So I was able to go there spend some time with the Mazatecs, and it's really quite amazing. If you go to their city center, you have 12 large murals of mushrooms everywhere, that even the cop cars have mushrooms on them. Like, it's a really much integrated part of their society, right? And these people, again, have been living very noble, humble people, very gentle, but living in equilibrium with their environment, you know, for a very long time. And we have this fear in our society, if these became legal, people would run amok, take them on the street, be violent, go into psychosis, like all these big fears. And we should be looking at, we live in a very different society that isn't used to these, a different kind of container. Now we have a very living example that cultures have been using for 1,000 years. And there's about 30,000 of them, you know, of the Mazatecs still left. So the way we got familiar with him was Gordon Wasson. He was an amateur mycologist and was a vice president at J.P. Morgan. Went and that these Mazatecs existed because Harvard had published a small study about them, a paper unknown, but he had to travel around the world and learn about mushrooms, just not psychedelic mushrooms, just mushrooms. So it's this thing. So he found a way during 1955 and had a mushroom ceremony with the curandera Maria Sabina. 1957, he published about that ceremony in Life magazine. And that was the first time the world at large, in a mainstream way, became aware of psychedelics, specifically of psilocybin mushrooms. A few years later, Timothy Leary, who was a director of psychology at Harvard at the time, went down to Mexico, took him. And he said he learned more about mushrooms in this 15 minutes coming down from the journey than 15 years of studying psychology during grad school. Right, so he brought it back to Harvard, started the Harvard psilocybin experiments, and this really took hold and started a lot of the 60s revolution. But LSD also came to play, and that has its own origin story. Albert Hofmann, a chemist, discovered it in the 1930s, looking at a different kind of fungus, ergot, and he was trying to find a substance that would induce pregnancy. He put LSD away for a few years and had a dream about it 3 years later. The molecule came to his mind, went to tamper it again. Some got on his skin, right? And he was feeling really awkward and decided to ride his bike home. And he did the infamous bicycle ride, the first intentional use of LSD. And the 77th anniversary of that was Sunday, you know? So that's an awesome big part of our psychedelic mythology. And because LSD was cheaper to make, you could make it large amounts. And during the 60s, people couldn't grow their own mushrooms. LSD really took hold. And it is about 1,000 times stronger by weight than psilocybin, right? So that really spread through the culture. People got really scared. We had no containers, no shamanic containers, no elders, nobody directing us. People are having breakthrough experiences, also understanding and grounding. And you can imagine the older generation got really scared. And there's political processes, everything involved. By 1971, flat out, all the psychedelics were made legal and deemed with having no medicinal value and being addictive. By this time, there were already over 1,000 papers written on LSD alone, proving it had been really, really helpful. And as you know, as I have mentioned, but psilocybin and LSD are physiologically not addictive. If you take it 3, 4, 5 days in a row, it actually starts working. Like you could take any amount, it's just no longer working. It is an inbuilt mechanism in nature to not become addicted to these substances. So as I mentioned, Terence McKenna, in the 70s, went down with his brother to look for ayahuasca in the Amazon. And instead of ayahuasca, found the psilocybin mushrooms within a week, had a life-changing experience, and pretty much became the spokesperson for psilocybin for the next 25 years, published the Grower's Guide, given hundreds of talks you can find online. Him and his brother, who got his doctors, Stanford, focusing on the psychopharmacology of ayahuasca, really developed this theory that we've developed because of a relationship with psilocybin mushrooms. And after 15 years of studying evolution, academically, I've not come up through a better explanation of how we've evolved. So say the two of their main theories is that we learn to cook with fire and to act as an external stomach, freeing the energy in our body and moving it to our brains, so we got bigger brains. That falls apart because we have more free calories than ever before, and our bellies are growing more and our brains are not. Actually, cognitive scientists pointing out the brain has actually decreased in size since the agricultural revolution, which leads me to think we've actually been losing a nutrient that we had been taking before to actually cause our brain to grow. The other is that there's a feedback loop between creating tools, changing the environment, and that changing our consciousness. But then again, how did we even begin to create tools in the first place to change the environment? And our technology has been growing, accelerating at a rapid rate, and that has not at all translated to brain size, right? Technology, especially in the last few decades, has skyrocketed, but especially over the last 2,000 years, and brain size has actually been decreasing. And people have been for a long time trying to understand how we came to be here as human. And psychedelics have been so outside of our paradigm that these, explanations were not foreseen. So a lot's happened in culture recently, thanks to the maps for the last 30 years. They're really holding it down, worked really, really hard to move to FDA approval for PTSD. And then we have the Johns Hopkins studies. New York School of Medicine has got involved with psilocybin, the U of A, UCLA, over there in Europe, you have the Beckley Foundation and London College doing the MRI studies. And it's pretty much now coming to the forefront of so many different fields. So there's people that have worked an entire career so that could have medical legitimacy, it be on the forefront and take away the biases and help bring it into the society from a very top-down approach. Last year, there's a lot of movements on a grassroots level, and we've really broken through, especially with decriminalized nature. So first, Denver was able to pass an initiative that decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms. We did not think that was possible. They didn't even think that was possible. We're like, we're going to give it a shot and go for it. As soon as that passed, we were all enthralled, and within a couple months, Oakland got really in, and we're like, we're going to decriminalize all plant entheogenics. I went there, I was at the city council talk, and gave my testimony along with many, many other people. And with the unanimous vote, city council passed. And now all entheogenics are decriminalized in Oakland. It now also happened in Santa Cruz. There's talks in San Francisco, in Berkeley. Oregon has their own initiative. And hopefully it'll be on the statewide ballot next year. But with decriminalized nature that here came in Oakland, over representatives from over 100 different cities in the United States have reached out to use their protocols to initiate movements across the United States. So we're seeing a very mass movement working from the bottom up and the top down at this moment to help bring these into our society. definitely what I would say for people that are interested in this is to find a guide or a therapist, especially for the first time, somebody that facilitates and takes care of you, because it can be unlike anything you've ever experienced. It could be for as well as healing, and it's nice to have somebody around and really take care of those for you the few days. It might be a while, till on a federal level you can get that medically done, but there are places like Jamaica, like Eva mentioned, and also the Netherlands, where people can go and have these experiences in a safe, legal way with trained facilitators. There's a lot of trainings coming up. The CIIS has theirs. It's going, I think, just finished their 4th year, and it's getting people ready to become, certified therapists working in this field. MAPS will be doing their trainings, and to work with MDMA, people have to go through the MAPS training to actually be able across the country to work with MDMA, and MAPS will be in charge of making all the MDMA in the United States for the next years. And there's a newly emerging school of consciousness medicine that's just come up. Francois Borges released a book last year called Consciousness Medicine. She's been giving a lot of talks in the last few days. There's just been a lot of celebration on psychedelics. And she's about a 30-year groundwork as well as psychotherapy. So immense amount of trainings with her on a local level and in an international level. So with people want to be trained to be facilitators. And other ways people are following this trend right now is also with microdosing. As we mentioned, it also increases cognitive capacities, grows new brain cells, creates a sense of empathy. People I've talked to, actually, they're better people. Like, they have more patience. I'm like, I'm a better person. Like, I show up better in my relationships with this. There's a good book called A Really Good Day with Islet Walden. She was a Berkeley law professor who struggled for 5 years and went to all the different therapies, took so many medications, and nothing was working for her. And she had read about work around microdosing with I forget his name, Michael Faldeman right now. His name's just totally leaving me, but he wrote Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Fadiman, about his work with microdosing, right? So she was able to find some, and she had like one of the best months of her entire life. For the first time after she took it, she's like, I had a really good day today for the first time in years. Her productivity levels went up. Her relationship level and marital life with her family, with her husband, actually went up. She felt better about herself. So there's so many different implications for this, as I mentioned, with healing, with creativity, and there's really a trend right now with Silicon Valley. The innovations, that are possible with it, type of creativity. We're looking for new strategies to evolve the problems in our life by changing the perception we have. It's pretty much limitless. I would say we're standing on the edge of perhaps moving into the most untapped resources in all of human history by freeing our level of consciousness in a very much new way. If you shift consciousness, you shift pretty much everything. As Donella Meadows, a systems theorist, says, what's the best way to change a system is by changing its paradigm. You change its lens, you change its behavior, right? An ecological crisis is unprecedented. We're facing a destruction that we really have to unify around. Like, the entire planet can no longer say, like, we're not interconnected and we're in this together around this. And as I mentioned, like, you can shift somebody almost overnight. It's not guaranteed, but there's good probability with a really good psychedelic experience and it being held correctly, where they realize that they are the planet at some level. We are children of it, that everybody else is me at some very deep level, and we no longer want to hurt each other, that we care about each other. As Ken Wilber states, we move from these stages of egocentric, focus on ourselves, to ethnocentric, focus on tribal people like us, to world-centric, focus on the species and the animals around us, to cosmocentric, to realize actually I'm a part of the universe with all the matter and energy around it. So there's a lot coming up around this. There's 2 major conferences just in the next 2 weekends alone. We have Shakruna, the Psychedelic Liberty Conference, coming up next weekend. I think 70 different speakers. And after that, you have the Consciousness Hacking Conference, Awakened State Summits, focusing on psychedelics, technology, and meditation. So the world's quickly expanding in this. I'm glad it's taken the forefront. It's about time. Everybody seems to on board. As Michael Pollan pointed his book, a bestseller last year, How to Change Your Mind. He was really hard pressed to find any opposition around this. So we have scientists, politicians, FDAs on board. It's just pretty much everybody just wants it done correctly and safely. And as Terence McKenna would say, it's our birthright. It's our birthright as much as it is having sex, having children, getting married, falling in love. Like, this is a deeply important part of the human experience that perhaps will help us redefine what it means to be. And if this whole, theory is true, perhaps we can see that we evolved through this relationship with the mushroom. Maybe we can cultivate a new relationship with it consciously and move with the natural evolutionary dynamics of the planet and environment, and we'll move towards the future altogether, more unified as one. So thank you. Cool.
Yay.
Yay.
Thank you, Jahan.
For sure.
So without further ado, I think it's a good time to open up what I think a lot of us are also very excited for, which is some Q&A.
Let's do it.
I can only imagine there are a bunch of questions from, what is, for example, a good ceremony, to, things about your own experience, to what is the sort of psychedelic experience like in a clinical setting or in a shamanic setting, what might be the dissertation. So sort of listing all the questions, I will pose it to the group. Let's jump in. You can just kind of popcorn it, and Jahan, you can pick who you'd like to answer.
Cool. So whoever goes first. You'll have to talk out loud because I can't necessarily see. I'm on an iPad. I can only see 9 people at once.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Valerie.
Go for it.
Okay, so all of this sounds wildly exciting and incredibly optimistic. I'm wondering if you personally have any cautionary words or things that we should look out for, potential risks.
Oh, actually a lot. It's definitely easy to get lost in the optimism because I feel like we need it. It's something necessary, and there's excitement around it, right? I've had so many difficult journeys. I would say most of my journeys are hard, and I really get caught up in the enthusiasm. But for me, it's a lot of travel and a lot of hard work, and a lot of shadow work. And I feel going into that space is what we're missing. Right now as a culture, we're not moving into the darker emotions, the heavy emotions. Whether it be what our culture has done as a past or the wounds we haven't healed personally, right? They're very difficult and uncomfortable. And not everybody has such a hard time as I do. I mean, I've taken doses hundreds of times. I've tried a lot, and I keep doing it because it gives me a lot. But they're very painful. People shake a lot, they throw up a lot, they're confronting shame, fear, uncertainty. That's why I say having a skilled guide is very important. Somebody you can trust and drop in with, that holds your hand, that's there with you, that does body work. It's sad that it's like you can't just go on the web and find somebody. Like, you can do that if you go to say Jamaica, but here it's just it's harder to find that. But I would recommend it if that's possible. Context matters a lot, right? Again, I always do amounts, like how much to take and what kind of experiences are possible. There can be ego inflation, right? Like, say somebody has an experience of God and I'm being God, and they have no context around this, and they're mostly in more of a Christian context. Within 3 or 4 weeks later, as they're more moved away from it, they might be like, Jesus, that's this kind of stuff happens, and you're like, wow, now you're gonna go through a whole bunch of things of checks and balances in your community. Like, it can cause a ruckus. I've seen this with friends recently where they have this huge breakthrough, their life has changed, and they tell their parents, and their parents are really fucking scared. My child has now become unstable. And they're like, no, I finally seen the light. You don't get it. It causes so much frictions, especially at also work and with friends. And so because it's still new in the culture, I would actually limit the conversations we have it unless you can say it in a very good way that's actually transmutable with like, you know, more of a kind of discernment to others. You know, like you do want to say, hey, this changed my life and this is amazing, but to be like, you know, everything's gonna turn out okay and we're all, you know, amazing and we're all made of love and light. It's just like it feels so ungrounded for a lot of other people. Yeah, go slow. Like there's no rush. As Terrence McKenna pointed out, it's just like once you come to psychedelics, you found like the gas pedal. You know, like he says, like nobody moves into meditation normally with their legs shaking. You know, like people wanted to grow. It's just like now you're actually looking for the break. So like, and it's forever giving. You know, like you will always keep growing. This is, I believe, it's a natural process of how we evolved with the plant world. So lots of discernment, a lot of caution, move slow, be really cool with yourself.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
We've also got some questions
I have
coming
a question.
in.
Please, happy.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about in terms of integration of these really magical experiences, if you have any advice on that. I mean, one situation I faced was that last year, I had this one like really life-changing mushroom trip where I felt like a new person, but it was really intense. Like I felt the first 8 hours was like I was going through hell, but then the last 4 hours was like I felt like God, and like and then I think the 1 month after that, I just felt like for no reason, like I just felt so much like psychological safety and I just felt like a new person. But then over time, that feeling just disappeared, that kind of safety and like just feeling peace with myself without needing anything. So I'm just curious about like in terms of integrating these trips, like do you have any tips? I mean, I think part of me feel like maybe I'm just attached to that outcome. I was like, oh, I kind of want to go back to it. But part of me was like, you know, maybe I need to learn whatever I need to learn from the experience. So I'm just curious about in terms of integration for both like challenging trips and enlightening trip that are life-changing. Like, what's your advice on integration?
Totally. First to say, like, there's so many different kinds of trips. Like, not every trip will be life-changing, and some of them are like, okay, that just happened and won't require too much integration. Like, I've had journeys where I'm still integrating 10 years later. And for me, definitely has been reflecting about it and thinking about it. And sometimes it happens naturally because it's so profound and large. We're like, how can I not think about that? Like everything else not say pales, but it's just like it's still working on you, you know, so far away. And if you work in a structure with a guide, integration is normally built in. You know, at least the people I've worked with where we check on you a week later and we spend 1 hour reviewing your trip, you know, again, and then 2 weeks later. And hopefully it's an ongoing relationship where you're working with this person for years and they're seeing your process and development and giving you reflections of this. Like, it's nice to have help. And you know, the framework I move through this with is that we're forming cultivation, like relationships with these plants. And that's how the indigenous people would do it. Here, we kind of have a thing where like more this culture very autonomous of like, you have to do everything on your own or you get enlightenment on your own. Or like you have this one experience that should be enough. More is like, this is a relationship. Like you generally don't just see your girlfriend or boyfriend once, you know, like you come back. But you come back more when you're called already. Most of my journeys, and I think a lot of people, like you get homework, you know, like you get very particular insights of specific things you need to change. Diet, food, conversations you need to have with people, being honest at work, moving. Like, I mean, sometimes it's major structural things. Sometimes it's little that you need to go carry out this project or write a letter. Like the sense is like, it wants you to have a good life. Like it's a part of you. Like my legal structure web, it's like pretty much feels like it's the entire cosmos and cares about you. It wants you to do good. And if you're not carrying out your homework, there's a sense of like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you coming back? Like, it might even kick your ass after that, you know? So I probably wouldn't journey again until you carried out the messages and homework, until you've done your last homework. Like your plate's already too full. You know, you don't have the space to carry on more downloads or insights. You know, go carry that out and then come back. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
For sure.
I just wanna comment on that. So I have shroom trip where I just want to experience things, and But my recent shroom trip, where I go into it with the intention of healing myself, of self-love, and I think with that intent, it does make the experience much different. And I think it did last, and the experience, what I got from it, did last afterwards as well.
For sure. I would, yeah. Is it
Yeah.
it? Right now? Yeah. I would say there's reoccurring things that are pretty much general across everybody. One of them is self-love. I don't care who you are, we're all working on that, because there's always more of that, right? Like, so it affects so many parts of our personality, our insecurities, our self-esteem. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy, are those familiar, right? Like, we move into physical needs being met, then we move into relationships, connection, and then we want self-esteem. Like, we're all trying to feel like we're good enough. I think that's a part of our growth, and we're getting nutrients from that. So if you get more self-love, like you have more confidence, you can show up more in your relationships, you could carry out your vision or dream or purpose. Like, it'd be hard to carry out a sense of purpose on this planet without feeling some self-love. That feeling that you can really support yourself, or you're by the cosmos or larger whole. So that's always there, right? So if I'm working with a client, you're always moving them in that direction. Like, love very much is unity, like in every way. It's like, are you being unified here? Are you being unified in the cosmos? It's this love is kind of this process of bringing things together. Like, if you love a partner, you want to be together, right? So you're trying to bring the fragments of who you are, including the shame parts of it that we fragmented and push parts away, and create a sense of wholeness, so all of it has place. So always, every journey, and the more deeper you move into that and tell yourself, like, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself. Like, it's like a mantra. It can serve you all in navigating the journey. Yeah. Thanks, brother. Smart.
I have a question around the difference between DMT and ayahuasca. I've heard that DMT is kind of like very similar in terms of like the chemistry that happens in your brain, and ayahuasca is more of an extended effect. But I was wondering if you could speak to the difference of intensity between both, as well as the different kind of takeaways that you would expect to get back into your daily life. So also along the lines of the integration question that Happy asked as well. And obviously, like, there's different experiences for every trip. So maybe there's no like one blueprint, but very curious about your personal experience and also general takeaways.
Totally. I mean, just to be transparent, I've only done DMT and ayahuasca a few times. Like, my focus has been like a lot of mushrooms and MDMA. But they're all, so DMT is the main proponent in ayahuasca, right? It then does just extended. So DMT, LSD, and psilocybin they're all tryptamines. If you've ever seen the chemical composition, they look almost like each other with just a smooth little fidgets on the end. So they pretty much have like the serotonin compound, and they build off. So psilocybin itself has DMT compound in it, exactly mirrored, and it just adds atoms into it. Right, so they're very, very similar. Terence McKenna would say, as long as you take all of them at high amounts, they all go to the same place. Like, they all go pretty much to a tryptamine palace. Given that these, again, grow naturally on the planets, that's even the mycelium from which, like, that connects the trees from which DMT grows as actually passing communications, that we're all part of the same universe. Like, the insights are fairly much the same. Ultimately, that we are one being. That love is the most important thing. Keep learning. Heal your family members. It actually really cares about, like, your relationships. Cares a lot about love. Like, how are you being in integrity with yourself and everybody around you? Are you being honest? Like, what are you hiding from yourself? How are you helping the world? And like that, ultimately, that you're one with all the animals and everything on it. Like, the insights are going to be all around. And yes, we have like our own homework, like work a lot of times that we have to do at home with our family members, where that forms so much of our structures, our personality. So there's different angles, but the essence of it is almost always the same, as like healing and mending. Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
I had a question about frequency of usage. I feel like you're the kind of person who reads a lot of articles about psychedelics. You would probably have read this article about tracking wild boars and how often they eat mushrooms. And I feel like there were intervals mentioned in that one article that I read, but I'm wondering if there's like any sort of like guidance from either natural world or something like that, and the frequency or intervals in between psychedelics?
Yeah. I think there's different seasons in our life where that intervals can change. There's times I get clients where they're emotionally ready, they're financially ready, and they have space in their life to just journey a lot. And they are focused on self-growth, and they're really there to push the turbo button. And that might go for 7-8 months, right? And then they're fully, and they're completely different personality, and everything's changing. Now it's time to carry things out. And they might have gotten clear on their sense of purpose. Like, now I know what to be doing in my life. Like, I know what I need to be focused on. I know who I want to be with. There's like, the structure has changed so much that they're not needing to journey anymore because everything is clear. You know, like, it's giving them all the pointing signs. I have clients that's come in, and he had one of the most important experiences in his life. He talked to his dead wife for 5 hours, you know, like, it was completely shifted and gave peace to his heart. You know, he just wrote me recently of like, I can't believe that happened. I'm still, you know, 5 months later, it's like taking in what's occurred. And in the journey, he was told to come back once every year. You know, I think as a recommendation, seasonal is pretty good. 4 times a year, just a lot. You know, I mean, if you have 3 months to think about your journey and integrate, like, I think it's a really awesome process. And then other times there's once a year, you know, like, I think the frequency can change. And as I mentioned, like, there's this built-in mechanism in nature, specifically with mushrooms and then LSD, survive for fungus, that you can't take it too much. Like, if you take mushrooms, like, you almost can't really take them again next week. And you pretty much have to wait 3 or 4 weeks between mushroom journeys to really have a full effect, right? Like, it's no longer just working. Ayahuasca works in such a way where you can take it night after night. And so I would say, are you carrying out the insights? Are you integrating? You know, like, if they're giving you a whole bunch of homework and information, but you're not actually making it a part of your life, then you'd have to really ask, like, why am I doing this? You know, is it harmful? Like, it's all here it's here to support your life. Like, that's the function of psychedelics. And if you're no longer being in your life, like your regular life, then you might be losing the reason of, you know, of why we're doing this. Cool. Thanks. Thank you.
I've got a question around facilitation. In some of your work, it sounds like you've actually facilitated some of these experiences for people. And I'm wondering, not necessarily the coursework, but the things that you've integrated from the coursework to be a great guide, to be a thoughtful sitter, an administrator and facilitator and shaman. Whether it's from indigenous tradition or from clinical tradition, what's in that syllabus? What are some of those things that you've taken away to be an amazing sitter, an amazing shaman there?
You know, like, as I mentioned, I've gone through a few different trainings in this area, and they've had their own syllabuses and all of that. And just for me, what it really comes down to is definitely love. Like, the thing that's really going to matter the most in that session is how much trust that person will have on you, right? Like, if they can feel your integrity and they can trust you. If they don't trust you at any moment, it frees up and they can't surrender and can't move forward, right? They're going to sit in their self-protection around you and they can't drop in. And so I think we trust other beings very instinctively. Like, we can tell the way an animal can feel like, hey, is this person in the room trustworthy? You know, a dog will, or with each other. So I think your self-work constantly, like, are you in integrity? Are you being honest? Are you grounded? Right? Like, are you a rock for them? Is your presence there in the room? If that's not there, they can't relax. Right? And as you have those qualities in your consciousness, everything else fairly much falls in place. Everything else is like small logistics, like saging, you know, there's music, you know, we do the prep sessions. Like, I do 2 prep sessions with all my clients first, because it takes time to build trust. So hopefully we're meeting 2 weeks out. You know, we meet for an hour. I get to know their story, what they're working on. It's a little more organic. We meet again. They feel more comfortably. A week's gone by. They get to know me. And by the 3rd week, I mean, they might be dropping to the most intimate space of their lives. You know, regularly I've had people be like, I've never said this to anybody. Like, psychedelics for the most part are like truth serums. Like whatever's there, like it comes out. There's poison that wants to come out in a very psychic, content way, like it'll come out, and that's what's going to help heal them, right? And so they need to know that like you're really, really safe to be in the most vulnerable parts in, so yeah, I think that the character part of this, I think, would be the best answer for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Jahan. Question for you, man.
Go, bro. Looking for you. Oh, yes.
So,
go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned having some hard times when you're on psychedelics. And so my first question is, what strategies, what do you do when you're having a hard time that gets you through it?
Okay. Haven't done it so much. It's just the knowing that it's helpful for me, that I'm healing. Like there's such a trust in the medicine because it's given me so much. And so while I'm sitting there in agony, where I'm like, could it be possible to feel more pain or fear? Like I'm at my limits. It's the knowing that this ends and I actually get a lot from this. Normally after that experience, I feel an immense sort of power. It kind of just like, I think when we break down fear, it turns into power, right? And in all this deep uncomfort on every level, and it's unescapable, and it does, in a very alchemical way, does digest and transmutate into something else and a life force. Reaching out for help, being alone while that's happening is really hard, really, really hard. So trusted friend, a guide, a partner, somebody, so you're not feeling alone in that pain, is really, really helpful. Again, with a guide, hopefully they can guide them into like love, truth, relax, or it can be more like they could do body work on you, everything that we can to help the system settle down. But some of it will just be like, by its essence, difficult, but that's also what makes it real, like people want the silver bullets, and I think this is the closest thing we have, but what makes it real is that sometimes the difficulty of it, like that helps create new structures within the personality. It forges new parts of us, and sometimes that's done through pressure.
Cool. Thank you. One more question, quick question. What's the highest dosage of mushrooms you've ever taken in one sitting, and how was that?
Yeah, 7 or 8. And I went to visit the Mazatec, and they gave me 2 big plates of mushrooms that were not, that they did not measure. And that was a lot. I have a good sensitivity to it. I've been, talked to my mentors that they've been taking it for 30 years. And they said the more you do it, the more sensitive you become. Where he used to take, 7, 8, 9, now it takes 3, and it still gets there. So it's definitely, as a relationship cultivates, I took half a gram the other day. I was like, oh, wow, it's here. The most I've given is like 10, 11, 12. But at the same time, I see what 10 is for them, and I feel that with a 5, so I wish our bodies are so different, our psyches are so different. Some people need 12. Some people's egos or structures are so much hardened, where they really, really need a lot more to break through, while other people might just take a gram or 2, and they're going through in a visionary voyage through all the layers of existence, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I have a question. Have you seen any links between shamanism, mental illness, and psychedelics?
I'm wondering I know the more of the Western society used to look at shamans. There's a great book called 500 Years of Shamanism, Path Through Knowledge, and it shows pretty much 63 writers, throughout the last 500 years, and how they perceived shamanism and how the perception of shamanism has shifted, where in the beginning, they used to be seen as witches, as devil worshippers, and eventually became seen as psychotics, in the culture, and now they're seen as revered as people of knowledge. So the Western culture's perception of shamanism has shifted a lot, and used to just think people that were shamans had psychosis. There's the other part of your question of, well, does psychedelics create psychosis? there seems to be a small amount percent of the population, specifically those that are, you know, predisposed to schizophrenia. I think it's like 1% of the culture. And it normally shows up by the early 20s, you know, and it's genetic, and that's sad. So there's certain people that are already having a really hard time being grounded in reality, that too easily see connections between everything, but it's not grounded. Sometimes it's out of fear, like a paranoid schizophrenia, where they just kind of make all the connections of the world if somebody's trying to kill them, right? So they want to put them in a psychedelic state where they're just seeing more and more connections, or, you know, more of a manic type of episode, sometimes with bipolar, where like they're in a manic state and thinking like they're the best people here and they're here to save the world, right? So I do think at some level psychedelics might be for everybody in the right container and right time, but they are not for everybody at any moment. You know, I think there should be an assessment of like, well, is this person psychologically stable right now? Because they could be very destabilizing, and you don't want to make their life harder, or else, you know, why did we do this in the first place? You know? Yeah, thanks. Was that your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, and I really kind of have a tough time like wording this the way that I intend to, though it's kind of getting at the idea of some folks with like mental illnesses, like I guess like historically in indigenous communities, like how that was handled, and
Yeah.
'cause I've heard things like some of these folks were shamans, and that was a place in the society, and there were like people and mentors and elders to support that process. So yeah,
they're coming from such a vastly different culture, right? Like, I mean, for one, psychedelics have been part of life for so long, and their cosmology is different. Like in those cultures, for somebody that's seeing synchronicities all the time, that their thoughts are being communicated and mirrored with their environment, they could be seen as shamans, and they're seeing signs and visions everywhere and saying like, you know, we think the cattle and the buffalo went this way, and we trust them because I had a dream that said so, right? Or like this owl came and sat next to me and I know what it means, or I talked to a spirit. So in that cultural context, it makes sense because they're all on board and have agreements. If somebody's saying that here, I mean, if you say it to the wrong person, within the week you're put in a mental institution, you know, you told you need medication. And so the paradigm that they lived in is so different that it holds those people in a very different way, and it can see their gifts, you know. And our culture, if you're not quote unquote normal, like you're on the fringes, you know, you're either given medication or put somewhere because people don't understand you. So totally, the shaman can be seen as a person that walks between worlds, right? And a normal person here, unless they're very well psychologically and socially adjusted, they would have a very hard time getting around with our society as it is in the present day.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
We may take one more question, and then we'll do our little closing set. And if folks want to stick around and chat for some longer period of time, we might do that. So let's see if there's even one last burning question. Now's your chance.
I have a question about, you said there's a study that found psychedelic make the neurons grow. I'm wondering, is there a difference, like if you take a big dose, or if you're microdosing, is there a difference in how your neurons are growing? And yeah, which way is better?
Yeah. So there's a study between UCLA and then those two, then New York School of Medicine and Johns Hopkins, because New York School of Medicine and Johns Hopkins were pretty much using the equivalent of 4.5 grams of mushrooms. And the study at UCLA was using 2.5. What they found is when people took higher doses, there was more chances of having a life-changing experience or a mystical experience, right? And I believe that would correlate to neurophysiology of there's just more brain growth and interconnection. But with the higher doses also came the possibility of more anxiety and a difficult experience, right? Lower doses might have less of an impact, but they might be easier to navigate. right? So the deeper you're going in this water, the more this might be available, but the harder it might be to swim in it. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
For sure.
We've got two more little Asana traditions before we transition to kind of the whatever wants to happen. And the first one is to remind each other here that this is our community, not any one person's, but really just us. And we come in together, and one of the best ways we find to do that is to give everyone the chance to speak to whatever it is that they might have to offer or any asks that they have. Think of it as kind of your communal, loving Craigslist. And one thing that we ask is that these asks not be work related, but otherwise anything's up for grabs. Maybe you're looking to, fill up your home, or you're looking for more toilet paper, stat, or maybe you're looking for, creative solutions to indoor dates, or, ways to take care of your cat. So please, anything goes, but for work things, and the floor is yours.